The ES6 brought us a cleaner way of creating objects and setting up the inheritance in JavaScript. Now, behind the scenes or under the hood, JavaScript is still using prototypal inheritance. However, ES6 classes allow us to write more cleaner and predictable code. First, let's create objects the old way with constructor function and compare it to classes. So first, let's create a constructor function by the name of employee, and then we're going to create a constructor function by the name of the manager. And the idea is that the manager constructor function would be inheriting a property and a method from a employee constructor function. So first things first, we'll have a function. We're going to call this employee. So this is going to be our constructor function. Then here we're going to pass the ID. And within a code block, we're going to say that this .id is going to be the equal to ID that we're passing in. And also we would want to right away set up a method in the prototype. So all the instances of this constructor function would have access to this method. And we're going to say that employee, then we're going to have the prototype property. And here we're going to have the name of the method of show ID. And we're going to set it equal to a function. Now we're going to have to write it like this. So function, and then here we're going to write within the function body of a console log. Now, then we're going to use a template string, and we're going to say my ID is, or we can say my ID number, since we're going to be passing as a number is, and then now we would want to use a $sign and curly braces, since we would want to access whatever we have in the ID. So we're going to point back to the property of this .id. So once we have created a constructor function and we have added method to the prototype, we can call this function and set it equal to a new instance. So in our case, we're going to do const John, and the John is going to be the employee. Now for the John, we're going to pass the ID of 23. So we're going to have to call new, then we're going to have the employee. And here, since it's expecting a parameter of the ID, we're going to have a number of 23. Now, John is going to have a few things, so we can do a console log. And for the John, if we console log it, we have the ID of 23. And we also have the access to a method. Now, the method would be show ID. So John, show ID. And once I run the method, now you can see that my ID number is 23. Now let's create another constructor function, and that constructor function is going to be called manager. And again, all managers are still employees, so we would want to set up some kind of inheritance. So here let's have it as a function, manager. So this would be our constructor function. Then we're going to pass the ID, then the name, and then over here this would be a department for our manager. Now once we have set up everything, now we want to access the same property. So we'll have this dot name, and I'm going to show you why I'm skipping the ID in a second, but let's just move along and let's do this dot name is equal to name, and then this dot department is going to be equal to the department. Now we're also going to set up a method in the prototype of the manager also, so all the instances of the manager can access this, and we're going to say that this method is going to be called meeting. So let's have it as a manager, then prototype, and then over here call meeting. So this would be the method name, and in the method we're going to write function, and in the function we're going to have a console log. Now here we're just going to write I'm calling the meeting. So we can either use template strings, so then we don't need to use about quotation marks. I am calling a meeting. So the manager is calling the meeting. So once I save this, and once we're going to create a new instance, so in this case, let's just say const Sarah, and she's going to be the new manager. So we're going to have a new manager, and we can pass over here the name and the department. So let's write over here name, and the name is going to be Sarah, obviously, Sarah, and here we're going to say the department. So we're going to have it as a department. Now the department, let's say she's going to be in sales. So we set up a Sarah. Now Sarah has two things. She has the prototype method, so she can access call meeting. So Sarah can call meeting, and we can also do a name of Sarah and the department. So again, if we do the same thing where we have a console log, and for the console log, we're going to have a Sarah, and we'll notice that she's a manager, and the name is going to be sales and department undefined. So let me go back and figure out what I messed it up. We have a this.name, then we have this.department, and maybe let's just delete the ID for now. So here we are just passing the ID. Now the issue is that I would still want to access somehow the property that I have in the employee, and I also would want to have the access to a show ID. So what would be the way to do it? Well, we would need to first access the employee this, and then we also would need to set up the prototype and the constructor. So in order to get an ID, so we have the ID property, I would need to come back over here, and I would need to call this function of the employee, and I'm going to need to attach the, again, name of the function is going to be the call, and the first parameter is going to be setting this. So I'm setting a pointer of this back to this manager constructor function, and then the second I'm passing the parameters. Now here, since I'm expecting the ID, since we're passing the ID, I can go back over here and I can just say ID of manager. Now I also would need to change with a new manager. I would need to pass the ID. So in my case, let's just say that her ID is going to be 34. Once we save it, not only is she a manager, she also have the ID, which we're getting back from the employee. So we're starting to get the inheritance. As you notice, we didn't need to set up over here this parameter. We just pass it within our constructor function. So first part is really great. Now we have the access ID. Now the second one, I would still want to access the show ID, because if we're going to go after the Sarah call meeting and we're going to say call ID or show ID, you notice that we're not going to have access to it. I'm calling this and it's complaining that there is no way, because Sarah show ID is not a function. So what is the way how we would do that? Well, we're going to go up, and again, before we have the manager prototype, or let's say right after manager, we're going to have to set the prototype of the manager. And the way we're going to have to do it is going to be manager prototype. Now first we're going to point back to employee prototype. However, we're going to use the object.create. So we're going to use a object.create. Now object.create is using a object as a prototype. Now it expects a parameter of an object. Now since we know that we can use the employee prototype as an object, since this property is returning the object, now we're setting up the prototype of a manager to an employee prototype. Now also we would need to point the constructor back to the manager constructor. So there's one more line that we need to add. So manager prototype and constructor, and then we're going to set it equal to a manager. Now if we're going to be looking at a manager, we're going to be getting back the actual constructor manager. So for now, once I call the meeting, let's check it out whether I have the ID. So Sarah is called the meeting and show the ID. Well, can she do it since we set up everything? And sure enough, my ID number is 34. And if we're going to go where the new instance of Sarah was created, notice that prototype is going to be employee. However, the constructor is going to be the manager. Now, if we didn't add this line over here, then there would be no constructor. Now, once we have looked at the old way how we did it before classes, now in the next video, let's look at what would be a new and cleaner way of setting up the inheritance and creating new objects with a ES6 classes.